This is Killer Innovations, a show about ideas, creativity, and how you can innovate. Welcome to the Innovator's Garage, where you learn to create your next game-changing killer innovation.
Welcome to this week's episode of Killer Innovations, a show about creativity, innovation, and design. I'm your host, Phil McKinney. Periodically, we'll take a break from having guests on the show, and I'll host episodes that we're calling for right now just Ask Phil. So these are episodes where you can submit questions. We'll go through the archive of emails and pick a question, and we'll actually dive into it in a deeper context in the show, giving you more background. We may have already covered bits and pieces of it in previous shows or over on the blog over at philmckinney.com, but this is an opportunity for you to ask the questions where we will just dive in deep and get into the specifics. So in this case, this week, this is a question that came in a couple weeks ago via email from one of the listeners. And they've heard me talk many times on the show around this concept of what I call corporate or innovation antibodies. So the question that came up is how do you deal with innovation antibodies? You know, these antibodies are those people who are the ones that push back on your idea. They're the ones that say, oh, that'll never work, or hey, we've tried that before, or I'm the expert, you need to listen to me, or hey, you're the new guy, you don't know what you're talking about. How do you deal with these antibodies? And so what I'm going to share with you today is really 8 ways that I deal with antibodies. Now, you would think in my role, whether it's in my current role as a CEO of an R&D lab or when I was Chief Technology Officer at Hewlett-Packard, that I wouldn't run into antibodies. Well, don't be mistaken. Everybody runs into antibodies. They occur in all parts of an organization. It could be if you're a senior executive and you're trying to get people on your team to do the work of getting a project going. You'll actually get pushback coming up through the organization. It's not always the executives don't get it or the executives are trying to block the work, etc. And so, in my case, I've had to deal with lots of antibodies. And in fact, in my book, I dedicate an entire chapter on how to deal with these antibodies. How do you get people to actually embrace the idea that you're working on and that they become part of the solution and not the roadblocks? So let's go into this. I'm going to give you the 8 ways that I deal with antibodies. And then I'll share a little bit at the end about being the executive and trying not to be an antibody. So first off is really around what I would call preparation. If you just have kind of a rough idea and you're going to go pitch it and present it, you're going to run into the case where that antibody can smell the fact that you're not prepared. You haven't really thought deep about your idea. You haven't really prepared to understand exactly your idea. What was that spark? What's the problem you're trying to solve? The market you're trying to serve? You're just coming in and you're just winging it, thinking that you can come in with the back of a napkin sketch and try to get somebody to endorse your idea. You have to do the work. This is not a situation where you can just wing it. You have to prepare. You've got to put that background work into it. The other is on the preparation is also understanding who your antibody is. And that is understanding their background. Where did they come from? What school did they go to? Understanding who the perspective of that antibody. So preparation is both knowing that idea, but also knowing as much as possible around that antibody. It's not that dissimilar to lawyers going into court and really understanding who the jurors are, who makes up the juries, and how do you select the jury so that you get the answer you want. In this case, you don't get to choose your antibody, but you need to learn as much about that antibody as possible. It becomes, really an important part of truly understanding how they come from, what's the thought process behind them. Some of that background, some of that history may actually be a trigger for you to understand why are they so negative against your idea. The second thing that I do when I'm dealing with antibodies is really put together what I would call an FAQ, or frequently asked questions. This is a document that I've just put together. I just put it up on Google Docs when I'm working on a project. And I'll ask myself the really, really hard questions. The questions you hope nobody asks about your idea. Because look, no idea is perfect. You're going to have a weak spot in an idea. The market's not as big as some other areas. The technology is non-existent or harder to create, or there's other competitors in the market that are already doing something. So whatever it is, every idea has a weak spot. In an FAQ, that is where you sit down and you write down all those questions that you just hope nobody asks you. And then craft your answers. Write them, try them out on other people. You want to be able to be very comfortable in dealing with any kind of rejection or any kind of questions around the idea that you're pitching. And in many cases, I'll have FAQs. I've had some FAQs go 30, 40, 50 pages of questions, where it's a question and then maybe a paragraph or maybe 2 paragraphs have the answer. Don't go to writing 5-page answers. You'll never get a chance to even present that. You've got to boil it down to give a really crisp, clear answer. But what I have found with this FAQ is it's the best preparation for dealing with and responding to those rejections that you will get in the process of going through that idea. So, FAQ, absolutely important. And what I've done many times in the case of an FAQ is that I will actually open up that document to friends, and I'll actually have them sit down and actually put together questions, or have them actually propose questions that they've come up with based on the idea that you have. Get some people to help you out. This isn't just about you sitting there doing it on your own. Invite other people to both create the questions, but also to validate the answers. Does your answer address the question that they would ask you? And believe me, it's much better to go through that with a bunch of friendlies and through an FAQ than being up in front of a room full of people, pitching your idea, and then someone throws you that curveball question, and you fumble with the answer. Being crisp and clear and being able to respond to those questions builds confidence not only in yourself, but you convey that confidence in the way you communicate that answer, and therefore can convince that antibody, or at least convey to the antibody that, hey, you know your stuff and you know this idea. So the third area, and we may not be able to get through all of this before the commercial break here, but we'll try, and that is we're going to talk about crafting your story. It's what I refer to as strategic storytelling. And in the case of strategic storytelling, it's that ability to really craft a story such that people can really get it. They really understand what it is you're trying to convey. It isn't about putting up a series of PowerPoint slides that are very logical. You have to craft it in the story, and the key here is you have to make the story personal. You have to make the story such that the person hearing the story sees themselves in the story. Best example of this was when I was back at HP. One of the teams inside the Innovation Program Office was pitching me for some funding on a new idea, and they ended up crafting the story around my grandmother, who at that time was 93, living by herself, and the whole concept was aging in place, or aging in the home. But they crafted the story around this grandmother living by herself and the challenges faced at being a 90-year-old living independently. And they crafted it in such a way that I could see myself in that story. I could see my grandmother in that story. It had made the story personal. So crafting the story and doing a great job at really understanding who the person is on the other side and crafting that story, it went a long way. Needless to say, the team got its funding to do that project because they'd really put some thought and heart into it. They made the problem real, they made the solution real, and therefore it became a pretty easy innovation project to go ahead and support. So craft your story. So we're going to take just a quick commercial break here. We'll come back. I'll pick up a little bit more on crafting the story. when we come back from the commercial break, and then we'll wrap it up with all 8 through the rest of the show. So again, in today's show, we're addressing the 8 ways to deal with innovation antibodies who are blocking you getting your idea moving forward. Stay tuned. We're going to come back after this commercial break. If you want to get connected with Killer Innovations, text the word innovate to 33444. That'll sign you up onto the newsletter. That keeps you updated on everything going on here, gives you early access to each show. As soon as it becomes available, we send out an email to those of you on the newsletter. And that way then we can keep you connected. And so with that, we'll be right back after this commercial break. Don't go anywhere, and we'll continue on in our discussions around how to deal with those corporate antibodies.
This is Killer Innovations, a show about ideas, creativity, and how you can innovate. Welcome to the Innovator's Garage, where you learn to create your next game-changing killer innovation.
Welcome back to this week's episode of Killer Innovations, a show about creativity, innovation, and design. I'm your host, Phil McKinney. We're talking this week, we're addressing a question that came in from a listener around how to deal with innovation antibodies. Those people who block your ideas and from those ideas going forward. And I'm sharing with you the 8 that I use. We covered the first 2 in the first segment, which was preparation, making sure that you know as much about that antibody, the person who's blocking you or who could block you, and also really knowing your idea. The second one was the FAQ, creating a frequently asked questions document. Ask yourself those really, really tough questions and prepare and make sure you've got really good answers. The third that we were talking about was crafting your story. Being able to take that story, make it very personal. But as we were going into the commercial break, there was one more thing I wanted to say on this, and that is don't oversell your idea. Don't get into the process of over-promising. Oh, this thing's the next thing is sliced bread. It's going to transform the world. It's going to knock out Apple. Apple will be out of business after, this idea comes out. Don't oversell it. That is an immediate loss of credibility in the minds of the antibody, and you will never get over that one. So the next one, number 4, is on practice. You need to be able to answer the questions, present your pitch, and tell it in such a way that the antibody gets it. You need to know that idea. You need to know the FAQs. You need to know your story. Don't memorize it. This is a situation where I've run into somebody and they're pitching me. And all of a sudden they say, hey, do you have a few minutes? I say, yeah, sure. I'd love to hear your idea. Then they go into almost robot mode. And you can tell that they're just basically going from memorization. Don't memorize it. Know your material. Don't memorize your material. You have to make it conversational. Now, some people would call me cruel, but if someone's coming across as robotic, I'll interrupt and inject kind of just a really crazy question to see if I can throw them off their game. And if I ask them a question that they stammer, then they try to answer it and they can't pick it up, because you've now interrupted them and they've lost that flow. That tells me they've memorized the content. They don't know the content. You really need to know your material. And you need to be able to tailor it to the time allotted. Someone comes up to me and says, hey, can I get 15 minutes right now to talk to you about this idea I have? I go, hey, I got 5. You gotta give it to me. Give me a 5-minute snippet, and then we can follow up later. And a lot of times people stammer because they don't know how to take what they have in their head as a 15-minute clip of their describing their idea and make it fit into 5 minutes. And that becomes a real problem. Because you never know when you're going to run into somebody who could actually help move your idea forward. And what's really great about these whole 8 steps is it's not just about dealing with antibodies. It helps you also convince other people to get onto the bandwagon, become part of your team, be a supporter for your effort. If you're trying to go off, if the antibody's an investor, an angel investor, venture capital, bank for a loan, that ability to tell this story is critical. But you may be focusing on one VC, and all of a sudden you're at some event with your kids. You run into somebody who happens to be in the venture capital game, and you've got 3 minutes at Little League Baseball to tell them your idea and convince them to help you set up a meeting with their partners to listen to it and potentially fund your idea. So this practice piece is really critical from the standpoint of really convincing those people on your who you run into of the value of your idea. Now, again, I'm going to emphasize this. You're going to think I'm going to sound like a broken record, but practice makes perfect. It really is about that ability to get out there, and to really present and do it over and over and over again, because you just become more comfortable with the material. You get out there and get those questions and you respond to them. You're not going to be perfect. In fact, in Silicon Valley, when I'm coaching or mentoring a startup CEO, my advice to them is look, almost every night of the week in Silicon Valley, you can find a pitch event sponsored by literally thousands of organizations in the Valley. And I tell them, go sign up. Sign up for as many of them as you can. These are typically, they give you 3 minutes, they give you 10 minutes, some of them may even give you 20 minutes. You're on stage, you get to pitch, and then you get feedback. And this isn't a situation where you want to be in some closet making it perfect before you present it. You're better off getting in front of a live audience. Look, it's like a comedian. Comedians start off going to open mic nights, and then they just totally bomb and choke that night, right? But it is that process of getting up there every night, getting up in front of an audience, getting out there and practicing, getting out there and just doing it over and over and over again, that you really become proficient at it and you really become good at it. And therefore, then, you actually let your passion for your idea come through that process, and people get excited. They want to be part of your team. They're like waving their hands like, hey, how do I invest, or how do I join your team, or hey, can I come on as a co-founder, and I'll put some money in, I'll put my time. I think your idea is great. You got it. It's your passion. You got to let that come through. And when you're nervous and you're stilted and you're frozen up, that passion doesn't come through. So practice. You just got to get comfortable. I get asked all the time about public speaking. Do I get uncomfortable around public speaking? And I just tell people, hey, I started off way back, even when I was a youth. I was part of the Boy Scouts, and I was head of an organization inside the Boy Scouts called the Order of the Arrow. And I had to stand in front of thousands of people and present and talk and convince people to come along with me on a vision. And even as a 17-year-old, I've been in positions of doing this. Yes, public speaking, getting in front of people, it's nerve-wracking. But if you know your material, you take that part of the nervousness out. And so therefore, that really is a big help. So you've got to just practice, and get very, very comfortable with telling your story, telling that pitch. And now you've probably been listening to me, I don't know, this is 8 minutes or whatever, rant on you on practicing. So guess what you should do? Go practice. Get in front of the mirror, tape record yourself, get out there and just deliver that material, and just do it over and over again. Tape yourselfing is an excellent approach from the standpoint is you can see yourself, you can see if you stammer, you can see if you're making good eye contact with the camera, etc. So we're going to take another quick commercial break. We're going to continue on through the 8 ways to deal with innovation antibodies, or really blocking your idea. And how do you get around them, or how do you get them to come onto your side of the story? And we've only covered 4 of the 8. We're halfway. We're going to cover the next steps of them in the next segment. So stay right there. We'll be right back after this quick commercial break. Check out the show notes every week over at Kill Innovations. And again, we'll be right back after this commercial. We've got to pay a few bills. Be right back.
This is Killer Innovations, a show about ideas, creativity, and how you can innovate. Welcome to the Innovator's Garage, where you learn to create your next game-changing killer innovation.
Welcome back to this week's episode of Killer Innovations, a show about creativity, innovation, design, and I'm your host, Phil McKinney. Hey, before we get started into this third segment, I do need to thank a sponsor. We've picked up a sponsor for the Killer Innovation Show. Now, you're probably saying, hold on here, 12 years of this show, you've never had a sponsor. And you would actually be correct. This is a first. We've never been big on securing sponsorships, but I'll explain why in a minute. Common ask that I get from you, the listeners, is how to take your idea and turn it into a game-changing innovation. Now, you may have tried some of those outsourcing sites. I've tried them all. And I don't know about your experience, but it just hasn't been good. I'm always disappointed by the results. The sponsor for the show is TopTal, but they're different. For starters, they screen all the technical and design talent that they use. I mean, they really, really screen it. And just not about the technical skills, but also about communications and their personalities. They really become that matchmaker. For starter, the result is that 3% of those that apply get accepted, and you're guaranteed that everybody in your team is the A team. So a company using TopTal, there are companies like Pfizer and JP Morgan, also startups like Airbnb and Zendesk. And as part of the sponsorship, TopTal is actually offering to listeners of Killer Innovations an opportunity to try out TopTal at zero risk. Start a project, and if within the first 2 weeks you aren't convinced that they're just absolutely killing it, you get 100% of your money back. Plus, you get to keep the deliverable. So go over and check it out over at toptal.com/Phil. So it's toptal.com/Phil and start your project. Or better yet, just drop me a note at phil@killerinnovations.com and I'll make a personal introduction. That way you'll get the VIP treatment. So why am I allowing TopTal to sponsor this episode? First, my mission is to equip you, the listener, with knowledge, skills, tools to take your idea and make it a reality. And having access to top talent is absolutely critical. And I like TopTal. I've met with the CEO. I've talked to a number of their customers. We're actually in conversations about them doing, me actually paying them to do a project for me on something that I've got going in the mobile app space. And I've just been really impressed with what they've got, their talent. Second, taking on sponsors helps cover the cost of doing the show. I've been funding the show out of my pocket for the last 12 years. And part of this is if I bring on a sponsor, I can put more money into the nonprofits. And as you know, if you've been a long-time listener, 100% of the revenue I make off of my books, off of anything that I do outside of my paycheck job, goes to the nonprofits, hackingautism.org or Pioneer Education. It's not about being a moneymaker. And the key here is this is a great company for you to work with to get your idea and actually do something with it. As I've said 1,000 times on the show, ideas without execution are a hobby, and true innovators are not in the hobby business. So hop on over to TopTal, check it out. Again, it's toptal.com/Phil to get that special offer. And now let's move on back onto the right part of the show here. So as I was sharing 8 ways to deal with innovation antibodies, we've talked about preparation, creating your FAQs, crafting your story, and practicing your pitch. The next 2, I guess, really are subvert. So how do you subvert somebody to actually come over and work on your idea? Now, the sneakiest way that I do that is I get them to really convince them to actually give me feedback, and then I include that feedback directly into the idea. And so I have a method I call the sloppy coffee cup approach. And the sloppy coffee cup approach is basically I'll take an idea and I put it on a piece of paper, I print it out, I crumple it all up, and I take it to them. So it looks like, hey, it's draft mode. It's not very professional looking. And I go to the Antibody and I'll say, hey, what do you think about this idea? I'm just kind of sketching out some things. What do you think? And at that point, you've kind of lowered the bar. They're not reacting to you or have some reason why they don't like your idea. They're really looking at the idea, and you're asking them for their input. So they're going to give you some input. Here's the trick. Whatever they say, include it. Add it to the slides. So therefore, when they see it come back and they actually see their input, you listen to them and you included them in that idea, it's now their idea. they're part of the process of creating and improving the idea. The sloppy coffee cup approach has worked with me amazingly well over my career at getting people convinced. So you subvert them. You get them, rather than being negative, to actually being part of the idea. Now they become part of the team. The next is influencers. So influencers is finding somebody who has an influence on the antibody. If you're talking about a VC, find somebody who's really close with that VC and get them to like your idea. If you're talking about your boss, who are those that influence your boss? How do you get them to like your idea? So you're kind of working around the edge, getting the influencers to actually like that idea and actually do something with it. So influencers can actually play a pretty, clever and interesting role from the standpoint of convincing them that, or you have something to reference to should the person you're trying to convince isn't convinced. You can say, hey, but Bob over here or Sally over there, I've talked with them. They seem to be pretty popular in the idea. Maybe you should check in with them. And the fact is you've already played that influence role with them. So don't overlook influencers. And here's another trick on influencers, particularly if you're trying to convince, maybe you're a startup company and you're trying to convince a company to back you on a pretty early stage idea. Find the non-obvious influencers. In my case, albeit I've had senior roles, I always have people that are kind of in my inner circle who I trust, who are kind of out in the field, have their pulse on what's going on, but they don't appear in an org chart. Typically, these people never worked for me or never even worked for the company that I work for. Finding those influencers, huge value, because if one of those influencers brings me your idea or your company, I'm going to be much more open and I become less of an antibody. Number 8. This is the one that always gets me into trouble when I share it. And that is ask for forgiveness, right? It's about, just do it quietly, do it under the radar. And then when it's all done, you just ask for forgiveness. Sometimes you just need to make that call. Do you believe that strongly in an idea that you're going to go ahead and just do it, even when you may get the negative pushback or when you even have a boss that says no? So it's really to go quiet, go rogue, go silent, stay under the radar screen. And I can point to probably a dozen products that are on the shelf today that you can go into retail and buy today that came out of my teams where we actually did it in stealth mode. It was not part of an official roadmap within the corporation. It was never presented to senior executives. It never went through formal budget approval. You just learn to get really clever on how to do these. And what's interesting is some of the ones that actually have come out since I've left HP, as an example, and senior executives now are claiming, oh, this was their idea. And I laugh. I get get emails from members of the team who are all upset about it. And I'm like, no, we achieved the objective, which was to get that idea and get it into the marketplace. So asking for forgiveness is a key piece. Now, the last one is going around your boss and going to your boss's boss, as an example. The question is should you go around a person and talk to the boss? Be very careful. That is burning the bridge, burning the pylons. What you really should do if you need to get to the boss is never go directly. Talk to others who can then get to the boss's boss. If you subvert and go around, you really run that risk of just blowing it up. You are burning the bridge. You are burning it down to the pylons. And my philosophy is never burn the bridge. I would much rather subvert and ask for forgiveness than burn the bridge. If the idea is really good, your boss will take credit for it. Forgiveness is easy to give. Stepping over the top of them, that's unforgivable. Many people just can't get over that, and you will burn that bridge. So be very, very careful of that. So never burn the bridge. So again, real quick, we'll go through the list. Preparation, FAQ, create your frequently asked questions, Craft your story. Practice, practice, practice. Subvert using that sloppy coffee cup approach. Find the influencers, find people who can influence the antibodies, and then ask for forgiveness. So we're going to take a quick commercial break. When we come back, we're going to talk about a new book that came out called Mind Hacking, How to Change Your Mind for Good in 21 Days. So when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about that book, and we'll continue on the conversations. So stay right there, and we'll be right back after this commercial break.
This is Killer Innovations, a show about ideas, creativity, and how you can innovate. Welcome to the Innovator's Garage, where you learn to create your next game-changing killer innovation.
Welcome back to this episode of Killer Innovations, show about creativity, innovation, and design. We're going to try something a little different today. We're actually going to play a clip from an audiobook. The book is called Mind Hacking, How to Change Your Mind for Good in 21 Days by Sir John Hargrave. We will have show notes or the links to the book over in the show notes, but rather than me just talking about the book as I normally do and give you the background and why I like the book, etc., we're going to play this audio clip from the audiobook. So here you go.
Until it's on paper, it's vapor. Visiting the Thomas Edison National Historical Park in West Orange, New Jersey should be on every geek's list of things to do in life. Advertised as where modern America was invented, it's an enormous brick building where, for more than 40 years, Edison's team of geniuses turned out innovation after innovation, including the motion picture camera and movies, improved phonographs and sound recordings, and electric inventions like the alkaline storage battery. It was the Google of its day. Edison is remembered today as a prolific inventor, over 1,000 patents in his name, but perhaps his most important invention was the process of invention itself. The meta-invention of how to make more inventions is Edison's true legacy. Edison invented the modern research and development facility, and if you go to West Orange, you can still walk through it. It's fascinating and instructive to see how Edison laid out the complex. Tucked away in a corner of his expansive office was a small bed. Edison was a believer in the power of power naps. After ruminating on a difficult problem, he would retire in the corner for a micro-sleep, letting his mind work on a solution. When the idea came to him, he would hurry to his desk and write it down. He would then rush upstairs to his second, more modest office where he did his true inventing. Here he would take the initial idea and sketch it out, making rough drawings of the idea that he wanted to pull into reality. Next door to this office was a drafting room where a team of draftsmen would take his ideas and begin drawing up formal plans. What parts would be needed? What materials would they be made of? Wrestling with these questions, with occasional input from the master, they would work up large-scale drawings from which the invention could now be built. From there, the drawings went to a machine shop full of small electric tools. Frequently, they needed to build machines to build the machines that would build the inventions. In this first shop, they could fabricate any small parts needed. These parts went below to a large-scale machine shop, a huge loft space filled with motorized pulleys, belts, and gears that could provide the power to manufacture the invention itself. Thomas Edison once bragged about his facility. "We can build anything from a lady's watch to a locomotive." From an idea, to paper, to plans, to machining, to manufacturing, to a finished product. It was an early prototype of today's R&D labs. I want to highlight what Edison did first when his mammoth mind presented him with an idea to feed into that amazing system. In order to turn that idea into a reality, he wrote it down. There is a power and a magic in writing things down that we take for granted because we do it so often. First, an idea is only in our mind, with no expression in the physical world. Then, with a few strokes of a pencil or a few awkward taps of our thumbs, that idea is now a thing. True, it may only be a representation of the thing, but it's still here in this world. Writing is a bridge or a gateway between the world of mind and the world of matter. It's how thoughts become things. It's how an idea gets from our heads into our hands. While this may seem basic and obvious, think back to how often you have given yourself a resolution for self-improvement or had a great idea to transform the world and you did not write it down. Be honest, what was the result? Take the goal of losing weight, for example. The World Health Organization estimates that 10% of people worldwide are obese, leading to increased risk of heart disease, strokes, diabetes, and some forms of cancer, the leading causes of preventable death. So a 2008 study, funded by the National Institutes of Health, recruited nearly 1,700 overweight people to experiment with a new approach to losing weight: food diaries. In addition to education and collaboration, the secret weapon in this approach was keeping a food diary, with participants keeping a list of everything they ate, whether that be on a pad of sticky notes or a digital device. While common sense says that keeping a diary would not result in any meaningful weight loss, the participants found that knowing their food choices would be recorded rather than eaten and forgotten was a powerful motivator to making better choices. Further, they began to notice patterns in their eating that could only be appreciated when they could write them down and take the meta view. The results were astounding. The more food records people kept, the more weight they lost, said the study's author, Dr. Jack F. Hollis. Those who kept daily food records lost twice as much weight as those who kept no records. It seems that the simple act of writing down what you eat encourages people to consume fewer calories. I've come to appreciate writing as a powerful and advanced technology, whether we're scribbling it on a notepad or typing it on a keyboard. When we write down our ideas, thoughts, or resolutions, we have a record. As Jonah Lehrer put it in his book, Imagine How Creativity Works, there was nothing, now there is something. It's almost like magic.
Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you next week. Don't forget, check out the show notes over at killerinnovations.com. That's where you'll find the archive of all of our shows going back all the way to 2005. Also, you can sign up for the newsletter. That's where you can best stay connected to hearing everything going on here at Killer Innovations. And so with that, thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next week. Bye-bye.